everyone. So as we were talking about, right, today, one of the most important things that I would like to share with everyone is on this right notion of how are we reading the SSAT passages smartly, right? What is this smart way of reading, and what is the most logical way of reading the passages and making sure that in general, we're preparing for SSAT in a rational and logical way. So a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions when it comes down into how do we read the passages. So to understand that particular question, one of the most important things that first I need to make sure everyone is having the same understanding is how tight time really is when it comes down to dealing with all of those reading questions in SSAT. So as we all know, right, the SSAT reading passages and the whole section is 40 minutes, 40 questions, which means you have this 1 minute to deal with the question, which in this case, it includes the time that you read the passage, the time that you take a look at the question, the time that you look back into the passage, and of course, the time for you to define all of those answer choices down below. And in the end, choose the one that you believe is the best one. So how is it even possible, right, for us to deal with all of that within just this 1 minute that we're given for each of the question, given the premise that if everybody wants to answer and make sure that you answer every single question the best way that you can. So many people have thought about, okay, based on my understandings of the passage, it means that I have to make sure that I understand everything in the passage. I have to make sure that I'm kind of familiar with this topic so that when I'm reading through all of those sentences, reading through the passage that are given to me, I can make sense of it. Therefore, I would be able to do all of the questions in a relatively easier way. That, in fact, everyone, is a very common misconception, right? What is that? As I'm already putting on a board, right? One of the main things that we're doing today is to defy those misconceptions. So the very first one would be, instead of reading everything word by word, sentence by sentence, and make sure that you literally understand every single thing, to be honest, in reading those passages, it's actually not applicable every single time. And why is that, right? As people who have some experience or certain practices already done with the SSAT passages, you probably have already noticed that they don't usually deal with those common topics or the ones that everybody knows, right? It's usually a little bit more technical, is usually a little bit more into the field. So probably you have already witnessed some of those terminologies, right? Things that are difficult. So what really should we do, right? When we deal with all of that, and it's inevitable sometimes when we feel like, oh, I've never heard about this topic even, right? For example, the passage deal with, oceans. It deals with, for example, very detailed explanations of global warming, or it starts talking about nanotechnology, or maybe the space, right? If I'm not a big fan of any of those topics, what would I do? Do I just give up on the passages and can't really deal with any of those question decodings? The answer is no. So let's just dive into it and take a look at how do we really defy those misconceptions and what turns out to be the critical thing and the core thing that can really assist us in dealing with those questions, even if I've never heard about or very unfamiliar with any of the topics that are presented in the passages. So the first thing that we need to make sure that we're doing is to avoid reading word by word, or word for word, sentence for sentence, all right? So how do we understand that, right? So given back of what we have already talked about, it's very common that we don't hear much of all of these topics. However, when we are dealing with it, right, what should be the primary thing that we're holding in our mind is what is in the question, or how do we really understand the question? That actually matters a little bit more than what's in the passage. I know it sounds kind of confusing and even to some of you kind of logically defying, but we'll get into it, all right? So regardless of how hard you stare at something that you probably don't know in the passage, it's not going to, let's just say, miraculously kind of come into you of, oh, I suddenly understand what it means. So a lot of times what we probably become unfamiliar with, will stay unfamiliar in that way. So how do we deal with the real question decoding? We have to look very carefully into the question and understand, what does the question talk about, right? What does the question really want to know? So I want to make sure everyone gets this understanding and idea that whatever is in the passage, it doesn't mean that we have to literally understand the meanings behind them, right? And given the fact that normally speaking, there's like 4 to 5 questions attached with each passage, meaning in the end, we only have this 4 or 5 minutes to deal with the passage. And how is it possible, right, for us to literally understand the core and then everything inside a passage inside out? We're not expected to do that, right? There's only 5 minutes, and then whatever that I remain not knowing so much is probably still going to stay that way. But what we really can do, everyone, is to understand what I focus more in reading those passages, right? So one important thing to give out to everybody today is we do not focus on every sentence or every paragraph with equal attention. Why? Right? There's going to be some of those parts inside that particular passage that matters more. And why is that? Right? Think about it. It's due to the fact that the passages, right, and the questions that are attached with it actually pinpoint some very specific parts for us to go back to. Therefore, right, when I'm trying to kind of get this logic out with everyone, it's critical for us to understand. We focus on the questions a little bit more. And then with this understanding of with the accurate understanding of what the passage and the questions are actually talking about, it would make us feel a lot easier when we go back to a very particular part of the actual passage. Okay, so avoid reading word for word, because in the end, what I happen to know about this topic is not the most important thing in answering the questions, but what matters more here is going to be what the question is asking about and whether or not I would be able to find the matching information. Okay, so avoiding reading it word for word, instead, we need to secure this accurate, all right, analysis or understanding of each question. Okay, everyone, so try to put that down on your own notes. And this accurate analysis, right, accurate understanding of the question is really going to save us time for us to not stuck into something that I don't know. And I really don't want people to feel panic, okay, or even scared off when you take a look at some words that you don't know or some terminologies that happen to confuse you. Why do we, right, become, let's say, smart, or how do we become smart when we get into situations like that, is to really focus on, right, what is in the question. Why bother with some of those difficult terms or difficult language, okay, or different concepts that are kind of being given to you when they're not even in the questions? With me so far, everyone? So that becomes a very important realizing moment. What should you focus on? Right? And what should you prioritize when you are dealing with the passages? It's not to read every single sentence, and it's not necessarily to say that, yeah, I probably should understand every single thing inside a passage so that I can understand and deal with the questions better. It's not always that. Is usually whether you can focus on the right thing in a passage, right? And given the fact that there's only 4 minutes, there's only 5 minutes that you spend on every single passage, it's not possible. And once again, we're not obliged in understanding this topic inside out just with these limited time. So that becomes one of the most important things. Try not to force yourself into getting too deep, right, into the sentences or into the passage. What matters more is understand each question forcefully, right, carefully, truthfully, and then find the right part of the text that is going to be the thing that you read a little bit more, right, harder into it. Okay, and then something else that I would like to share with everyone, okay, is sometimes I get the questions a lot about, oh, but what if I actually do know about, right, the particular topic in the passage, or I know the subject that this passage is talking about? So does that mean then I can use some of those, like, my understandings, right, in answering the questions, or can something that I know outside of this passage become a particular thing that will help me, in fact, to deal with the questions? So I would want everyone to actually think a little bit about that, right? And start analyzing a little bit of this interesting question. So the thing, right, that we were talking about, avoid reading, okay, word for word, sentence for sentence, deals mostly with the situation when you become unfamiliar with the topic, right? Like whatever ocean, space, nanotechnology, I don't know any of those, but I can still do the questions, because here, right, what matters more is what's in and what gets asked in a question. However, on the other side of the question, what if I do know about it, right? What if I happen to be like a little expert on it because I'm really interested in the topic? Then can something that I know outside of this passage become something assisting, right, or helpful for me to deal with the question? Right? As some of us probably have already get to the correct answer, or the real answer to this is no. Despite we know quite a lot, or despite to a certain extent that you become this expert and you know that, oh, something that I know here isn't in the passage, so I guess this passage is not very credential, it's not very, it doesn't have a very strong credibility. Okay, so when we are thinking in that way, right, try to use some of the things that don't belong to the passage to answer something that's in the passage. This is actually logically defiant. It doesn't make sense, right? So with that, and the next kind of very important reminder that I would like to share with everyone today is known as passage only. All right, so what does that mean? Have we ever thought about, or have we ever given a thought into why are those reading questions multiple choice, right? Why aren't any of those short answers? That is actually the true kind of key thing that we have to possess in our minds. Why do we emphasize on passage only? Is because all of those questions that you're now given are designed based on this one particular passage that you're given. And the fact that all of those are multiple choice questions give you this clear message that the correct answer is in fact already embedded within your ABCDEs, your 5 answer choices. Therefore, knowing something outside of the passage wouldn't necessarily be helpful at all, actually, because you are not given, right, to ask, or you're not given this chance to go ahead and say, oh, what do I know about this? What are some things that I happen to know? Those are not the things that are really being tested, right? So once again, guys, what is really important is to make sure that we are able to find, okay, let's just say spot the accurate match, right, between the question and right answer choices. So you're always giving a lot of answer choices that look like as if they're related to the question, or even they're answering the question, but we have to really be sharp about how accurate we are in spotting the matching, the capability between them. So passage only is going to be a very useful tool that I recommend strongly for everybody to start applying in your own reading experiences so that you could really effectively avoid a lot of those trap questions, all right? So whatever that is not mentioned in a passage, and if they happen to be some of the things that you take a look at and you spot out from ABCDEs, take them out, right? The passage didn't even talk about this. So why do we, right? And then another thing that's important is we do not make assumptions, right? We do not spend extra time in thinking that, okay, is it going to be true in life, right? This nanotechnology, oh, can it really be used in medicines? Probably it can. However, if it's not mentioned at all in the passage, that is not going to be sufficient as a correct or a sufficient answer choice, because once again, what matters more and what matters what do we prioritize? Okay, what matters primarily for us is always what's in the passage, and how does something in the passage becomes really truly connected to what is being asked in the question. So all of these, okay, kind of two connections that we're now focusing right now will really become a fortifying tool that everybody should equip with yourself. All right, everyone. And if I were to share a little bit something, okay, another insight into how do we deal with the reading passages carefully, right, and accurately is depending on, right, or it once again goes back into how do we make sure that we're understanding the questions all right, and how do we outsmart, right, some of those test designers in making sure that we're not getting tricked, okay, by sometimes how are the questions being given. So the third thing actually here, I would say, is to distinguish the trap, right? And we'll get into a little bit, right, to talk about what does that mean. Distinguish the quote unquote, right, traps. So those traps are a lot of times being embedded within the question, right? However, when we are actually smart enough and discerning enough to find out the shared commonalities among all of them, we are understanding the questions a little bit better. So for example, right, some of the questions might ask in this way. Which one of the following answer choices best describes what this passage is about? Okay, and think about what should you answer in that particular way of question, okay, or in that particular type of question. And then there's something else, okay? Which one of the following would the author agrees most with? And then you have your ABCDEs laid out, right? And something else could be choose one of the following that best suffices as the title of the passage. Well, it seems like all these three different types of questions are independent on their own and not connected at all. And they're just three different things that you have to deal with. But, right, regardless if it's asking you to choose the best title, to choose which one the author would agree most with, or to choose what this passage is mainly about, all three of them, right, everyone, is in fact asking about the same thing, or is based on the same thing. Or in other words, in order to answer all of these three questions, you need to have one basic understanding of the main idea of the passage, right, everyone? So as we can see, those types of questions, they look different, they sound different, the way of how they're being presented are somewhat different. However, are you really able to cut into its core and then really become smart and sharp enough to find out, oh, they're actually talking about the same thing, or they're actually asking about the same thing? Right? The most obvious one is probably going to be choose the one that best describes what this passage is talking about. That is just straightforwardly main idea, right? But the other ones, right, that are kind of camouflaged and they have their own disguise in the way of how the question is being worded. For example, now it asks you, right, choose the best title. But still, if I'm not so sure about the main idea, how would I choose the best title? So the best title is still based on, right, your understanding of the main idea. And then, right, for the third thing, it asks you, right, try to figure out which one, right, would the author agree most with. The author would agree most with one of those particular answer choices because it matches with the main idea, or it copes with the main idea. So all in all, right, everyone, what really are things that we have to pay attention to is get out of the trap or this particular confinement over what I must know about the passage in order to get all of the questions correct. In fact, it's not needed for you to always be the expert, right? And in fact, once again, realistically speaking, all of those passages, sometimes it's gonna bump us into a situation where we feel like I've never heard about this topic, or whatever is being discussed in the questions or in the passages are kind of unfamiliar and foreign to me. But we need to prioritize the questions, understand why the questions are given in that way, and try to analyze the patterns shared among the questions that a lot of times will deal with the passage, right? That will help us deal with the passage a little bit more strategically. So those are the things, right, that are really important that I want to share with everyone for now. So make sure that you're getting all of these down on your notes, all right?